So I'm not going to quiz our people in the church here because I don't want to embarrass our catechumens too much, because it's always hard to remember the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, which those of us who have been baptized, everybody thinks that's when you're confirmed. You don't receive the Holy Spirit when you're confirmed. You receive the Holy Spirit in your baptism. The gifts like wisdom and understanding and counsel. Gifts like, I got to make sure I get mine, fortitude and knowledge. And then the last 2 are piety. They're very related, piety and fear of the Lord. And they're like, yeah, that's a nice list, and they kind of almost run together, and so that kind of makes sense. But what's that really all about? Well, I think a lot of times as Catholics, we do not understand these gifts of the Holy Spirit because we do not understand why we have been given these gifts of the Holy Spirit. And Pentecost is always a good time to be renewed and be reminded of why do we have the Holy Spirit? Why were we baptized? Especially when we see some people who say, I want to be baptized. I'm a grown person and that hasn't happened in my life, but I want that. Why for the rest of us were we given those gifts of the Holy Spirit? And I think sometimes it's because they don't make sense to us because we sort of see it as how it kind of like enhances my own life. That is not why we receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit came down first on the apostles on the Pentecost day, and that they are continually being gifted in our hearts and our lives because we need these gifts because we cannot do the mission of the church on our own. And the mission of the church is very simple. It is simply that we proclaim Jesus Christ to all the nations. In other words, we share the relationship of Jesus and how it makes a fundamental difference because it is the only way that we have true salvation in our lives. And that if it sounds intimidating, because we're not used to doing this a lot of times, especially as Catholics, to share God with others, especially through the relationship with Jesus Christ, then we want to go back to these gifts of the Holy Spirit because of course we can't do this on our own. Of course we need tons of help from God, and because it is the very Spirit itself that we're sharing with others. And so that we have this spirit of the wisdom to have the knowledge of who God really is and how to share Jesus. The understanding, especially, like I really get the scriptures and how they relate to our daily lives. And how we have counsel and how we can kind of put all that together in a way that applies to people's everyday life. And that we also have those gifts that we're trying to share with others when we're trying to share Jesus, of the courage of not just like to be able to maybe say things out loud, like words like Jesus and I follow him, but we have a couple that's 55 years marriage, and when you share the gifts of your Holy Spirit, it gives you endurance. We need the endurance because you can maybe do it once or twice, but can you really sustain it? Well, no, we can't do that on our own, but we have the gifts of the Holy Spirit. We have the gifts of the Holy Spirit that gives us the knowledge of understanding, the knowledge and understanding of the actual content of what we can share to explain in some detail. And of course, we have the piety, we have the reverence that we have for God, and especially in his majesty, that we would not, in our fear of the Lord, want to do anything that got in the way of that, and that we continually live our life humbly and avoiding all evil. And when we do that, of course, we're going to be much more able to share the Holy Spirit with others. Of course, we're going to have, now today we're in the Vigil Mass, so we have these different readings, but that anticipation that they had in the Gospel today of the Spirit, that we're anticipating, especially with our catechumens. When you're baptized and receive these gifts of the Holy Spirit, I mean, when you see these people stand up in public, trust me, they're very introverted. Trust me, if you're thinking about that for yourself or know other people, that there's other ways that we can do this, because some people may not be able to handle that. But if you'd have told them a couple months ago, you're going to stand up in front of people and say, I want Jesus in my life, they would probably say no, because the Spirit is already working in your life. Imagine when you receive all these gifts of the Holy Spirit. how you're going to be able to share that with others. Holy moly. I mean, we got blown away, and we already have those gifts of the Holy Spirit. So we want to continue to invoke the Holy Spirit to proclaim Jesus to others because, as we were sharing the other week, we want peace on earth. We want to be the instruments of that peace, and that's going to only happen when we are sharing Christ and his salvation with others. We had a great story when we were meeting in convocation this week. The priest that was presenting to us, and he was talking about how teenagers were getting enthusiastic about sharing their faith as they were getting ready to be sealed in the gifts of the Holy Spirit in their confirmation. And so one of the students decided that he would take on the biggest project, if you will, of sharing Jesus. Because a lot of times, it's just pick one person. It's probably somebody you have ongoing contact with. This is not complicated. It's not like trying to get to millions of people, each one of us. And what he did is he went to the kid in the back of the bus. I know a lot of kids aren't riding buses these days, but the kid in the back of the bus, the one that nobody wanted to talk to, the one who was addicted to drugs. And he just sat next to him. He said, "How you doing today?" The kid didn't want to talk to him. Kind of moved away from him. And every day he went to the back of the church to talk to the kid. And after a while, he found out that he had a home life. And it wasn't too good. Because he just accompanied him on the ride. And then after a while, he found out that he wasn't really happy, even though he was trying to mask all this pain in his life because of the drugs that he was taking. And he kept sitting with him, and he kept just listening to him. And then he found him at the lunchroom and began to sit down with him just to accompany him. And then one day, they walked into their youth meeting, and he came in, and he said, "I want to introduce to you my new friend." After 6 months of sitting with this kid that nobody else even wanted to acknowledge existed, let alone talk to. And 3 months later, that kid was making a retreat. Now, if teenagers who have the gifts of the Holy Spirit and maybe a little moxie because they want to impress all their classmates, make it a little competition. It's not a competition. It's the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And on this Pentecost today, as we've been so inspired by so many people around us who share their faith with us, that we ask the Lord for whatever gift that we may particularly need to really meet people where they're at and to speak their language. And you might say, "I don't know what their language is." And I'm not talking about like a foreign language, just maybe the way to relate to them. We don't need to know that. If they were given the gifts of tongues at the Pentecost, we will be given that gift as well. Brothers and sisters, let us share the gifts of the Holy Spirit, because let us share the Spirit. Let us share Jesus with others, because that's why we're given those gifts. Let's put them to work, because we want to share this wonderful gift of Christ's salvation. And as we come to the end of Easter, we continue to give him thanks for the wonders of his resurrection, his ascension into heaven, and his bestowing on us his Holy Spirit at Pentecost that continues to renew the face of the earth and continues to inspire us to pray, "Come, Holy Spirit."